Hello, and welcome to the Building Podcast. Today, we're going to explore the role of trade federations within construction, and specifically looking at their roles in trying to professionalise the sector through support, direction, and leadership. One of the key elements in most building projects are the building services. These are some of the most complex elements of any building project and have a huge impact on the operational success of any of the buildings. They need to interface with both the structure of a building and its users, making this branch of construction an area that we all absolutely have to get right. I'm therefore really pleased to welcome David Frise to the Building Podcast. David is the Chief Executive of the Building Engineering Services Association, or BESA, and so is ideally placed to talk through the challenges and opportunities within this sector and how trade bodies can influence success. David, welcome to the Building Podcast.
Thank you, Mark.
Well, let's jump straight in. Why don't you give a sort of description of what BESA is and its role within the wider industry?
Well, as you described, BESA is a Building Engineering Services Association. It was the HVCA, some people may remember.
I do.
For many years, 120 years old. We have 750 members who are mainly in the commercial sector, mechanical and electrical sector. They carry out commercial projects. The majority of our membership turn over more than 1 million. So they're should we say, proper-sized companies, not many micro businesses within our sector. And anyone who designs, installs, maintains mechanical or MEP services is within our remit. Yeah, that's about it, I guess.
That's about it.
That's who we are.
And are most people in the sector members of yours, or do you think there's a
by turnover group? By turnover, I think we represent a significant part. So we've got, I think, 27 of the top 30 mechanical and electrical contractors within membership. So names you would recognise, like NG Bailey and Lang O'Rourke, Crown House, people like that, Balfour Beatty. But in terms of there are thousands of companies in the sector. And one of the things we also run is REFCON, which is the F-gas register for the Environment Agency. There are 8,500 member companies within that register. So no, we don't represent all the majority of companies, but by turnover, I think we do.
Yeah. And what do you think why would a member be a member of BESA? What are the sort of the key things you're selling? And
well, we have a series of for SMEs, I guess we have a series of things which we offer, from legal advice. We have a legal team of 4, which tells you everything you need to know about the industry. Who will offer members all kinds of advice, from reading a contract through to helping them when they're being sued or need to sue or can't get payment or whatever. We have HR advice. We negotiate with Unite on the national agreement. We have health and safety advice and a technical committee, which is very strong. So we're unapologetically technical. I guess for majority of members, though, the thing we do is it's the stuff you don't know, because that's the stuff that kills you, because you can't Google it, you can't chat GPT it, and you are likely to find that within somebody within membership or within our team. You are unlikely to be the only company in the country who has this particular either technical or commercial issue. So what you effectively do as a BESA member is increase your learning circle from 1 company to 750. And that's the big added bonus. For the majors, those companies that turn over more than 50 million, say, obviously they're not really interested in many of the services we offer in that sense. But what we do is give them the opportunity to say, well, this isn't our view, why you should do this. Because clients would say, well, you would say that because you want me to go with you and pay more. It's actually, this is the view of the whole industry. And that's how we come to develop things like technical standards that we use. Or if we need to lobby for things like retention change, that sort of thing is where we come into play with them.
Brilliant. I mean, it's not dissimilar to my own organisation, the National Federation of Builders, that is has a range of members, some of whom are very good at using those smaller services, and others which need an advocacy service to go and, as you say, explain how the world works to people who might need that explanation.
Sure. Well, I was a contractor for more than 20 years and a member of BESA, and they were like my back office. I didn't
Yeah,
have a legal team.
yeah,
I didn't have a health and safety person, but I had this back office that I could use because it came for free.
yeah, yeah. Well, let's look at that sort of interaction then with trade federations, David. You're sort of uniquely placed to provide because you have such a important role from building service. We said already it has such an important role within most projects. There are an awful lot of trade federations out there. I think the second chief construction advisor to government said there were 263 bodies within the industry, and wondered how on earth they all stayed afloat with their membership fees being paid, and how they then vied for that visibility to be able to influence things, particularly within government, was a real challenge. So how do you sort of how do you work with your neighbours, and how do you make sure that you carve your own space out?
Well, you join umbrella organisations, and you work collaboratively with others.
Yep.
So I sit on the board of Build UK at the moment,
Yep.
representing the trade federations on that. We had formed Actuate UK, which includes manufacturers, designers, so CIBSIA members, manufacturers, designers, and contractors in the development of standard policies on building engineering services.
Yep.
It just makes sense to do that. So you amplify your voice, and particularly if you're a small niche industry, sector, something that's maybe there's 20, 30 members or maybe 100. How do you get heard? Well, you actually join forces with others. So it's not just you saying this, it's this big
It's the
bit
wider
saying
body.
this. So
Yeah.
you can amplify messages that you would never get to amplify before.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely agree. The collaboration is the key to solving most of the industry's problems, and talking about them solves many
Yeah.
of those issues.
Indeed, I think there was a US president, and I think it was Harry Truman, said that there's no end to what can be achieved if you're happy for someone else to take the praise. And we try and adopt that policy in that. So our purpose in BESA is a better industry,
Yeah.
an industry that's competent, compliant, and profitable,
Yeah.
because that raises, the rising tide floats all boats. It improves it for everybody,
Yeah.
rather than a straightforward "we represent our members."
Yeah.
Because dare I say, occasionally they're not right about things. But a better industry is better for everybody. And as we say, well, so what? Why do you need a better industry? Well, 90% of us spend 90% of our time in a building. So it really matters that a building works.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you're in a hospital, and the ventilation system doesn't work, and let's face it, who knew ventilation was important before the pandemic?
Mm-hmm.
Then, you like the Edinburgh Hospital, it's not open. Children's Hospital is not open because ventilation doesn't work. So this stuff
Yeah.
really matters,
Yeah.
to our mental, physical health and well-being, and things like productivity. All of these things matter, and the engineering services represent more than half most projects now,
They do.
and
Yeah.
they're the heart and lungs of a building. They're the stuff
Yeah.
that makes it work. So
Yeah.
there is huge societal benefit to having good engineering that works.
Yeah. And as a trade federation, do you have teeth to make your members actually achieve those standards, or is that something you really sort of you have to try and
Well,
leave that up to the main contractors who might be employing your members?
so you can't just become a member of BESA. You have to go through a competence assessment audit, which is a two-part thing. One of which is, are you a proper company? And it's similar to construction line or safe contract or whatever. And in fact, the Build UK PQ process covered by that common assessment standard. Have you got insurances? Are you financially stable? And if you're a member of one of those schemes at the high enough level, then you just send us a certificate, and that's taken as read.
Job done. Yeah.
But there are 400 questions, I think, currently in that scheme, and we do support it. but not one that asks, "Can you do the job?" So our role is the technical audit, which is site-based, and then we audit our members, and we go and say, actually, can you strangle pipework into a plant room? Can you design and install ventilation or air conditioning or whatever it is? And you need to evidence that to us, and then you can become a member. And then we routinely audit them from there on. And we threw out about 30 members last year for a failure to comply with that. And that's important because we see that as a requirement for the Building Safety Act. So if you are a main contractor or you are a client, your procurement process will come under scrutiny when things go wrong, and it's only when things go wrong. And when you're standing before the judge and somebody says, well, why did you select that mechanical contractor? And you say, well, he was cheap. That's probably not the defense you need. And as far as we're concerned, we're the only third-party accredited scheme that does that "can you do the job" bit. So you, as a main contractor, discharge your duty of care by specifying a BESA member. Now, that's a hard path for us to do. As I said, we've lost members because of it, but we believe that's the right thing that ticks that, does it, our purpose of a better industry. Companies who are competent.
So that, I mean, really interesting about that competency, David, because it's not yet specified by the building safety regulator. It's a statutory requirement to be competent. But we have yet to see what those competencies, those organizational competencies, which are described in the building regulations, are likely to be. But you think you're one step ahead, and you're putting your own stamp on what you think that looks like.
Well, we've had Dame Judith Hackett on our podcast a couple of times about progress, and I think when she first did her first report, she said, you need to get on with this. Don't wait for people to tell you what good looks like. You need to decide that. So ourselves and also through Actuate UK, we are, part of our remit is to develop the definition of what does good look like. So we got another project which is what are the standards that apply to building engineering services, such that a client can be satisfied that a building on handover or after refurb work actually is compliant. And you need to do that because there are conflicting standards, or there are discrepancies within standards, and you get technological change that means that you have to develop new standards. There's a gap, and so that's what that project is about. But we can't do that on our own. We're doing that with CIBSE and the manufacturers and the ECA and ourselves and commissioning specialists, a whole massive coalition of people for the industry to come together to decide what is the standard. And the reason we've done that is that if you don't do that, someone will decide it for you, and then it's done to you, and then you go, well, I don't like that, but it's really difficult to change it. So you may as well try and decide it yourself, and that's why we're involved in those projects.
And I mean, those standards are purely UK based, or are you looking overseas to see what's going on? Because we're increasingly an international industry, aren't we?
Oh, we are. Whatever the standard is, whether it's an EN standard or an ISO, whatever it is, what is the appropriate standard for this work in the UK?
Yeah. Okay. So, David, I'm going to ask a difficult question now, because you're clearly on the moral high ground with your testing and checking of some of some of the more important parts of buildings. We talked around about the Building Safety Act, which is a direct result of Grenfell and the terrible disaster there that killed 72 people and has left life-limiting illnesses with at least 70 other people. Do you think that the trade bodies per se, as a group of people, were partly to blame for that failure? Do you think the lack of policing of competence within our industry and the acceptance of value engineering as a means of achieving projects, do you think the Trade Federation just been focused elsewhere, or are you going to plead the fifth?
No, I think we were all responsible.
I think we were.
The day after the fire when Twitter was still a thing, I did a tweet that said, we won't know the causes of the fire immediately, but we probably understand the culture that delivered it.
Yeah.
And we are all guilty working in an environment where we allowed that value engineering and that culture within the industry. So I sort of talk to my members, and they're sick of me hearing this, I'm sure, about we're under the misapprehension most clients want a building. They don't. They want a return on investment. And a return on investment requires three things: on time, on budget, and on specification. The only thing is, on specification is entirely optional. As long as it looks like the building they put in for planning, that'll do.
Yeah.
And I think we're still in an industry where just good enough is probably a bit too good.
Yeah.
And that is the culture that has to change. And that's what we're trying to do by offering leadership on this is the standard. And there will be difficult decisions to make that will hurt you, but you need to do the right thing. I think people in the industry don't go to work with the aim of doing a crap job, do they? They all want to do a good job, but things get in the way of stop them doing it.
Yeah.
And it's simple things like we don't design the building before we start building it. So we're immediately into build and design. And it makes it a hurry-scurry industry, which is really unproductive and an unpleasant place to work. And then I get really frustrated when people say we've got a skill shortage. We need to improve the image of the industry. No, you don't. You've got to fix everything. Have a better industry, and the image will look after itself. Not try and the technical term is polish a turd, which is what you're doing when you are doing that. You make the industry better, and then you will get somewhere.
I think for those who have been in the industry some time, actually, the image has improved immeasurably, actually. And there's, you look at the number of deaths that have reduced significantly, certainly since I've been in the industry. We've more than half the number of deaths per year that we incur, which is really good news. So I think things are improving slowly. I mean, clearly there's an awful lot of ground to cover yet, but it's not. There's a good news story out there, and there is stuff to be done. I mean, just on staying with the Building Safety Act, then this professionalisation and making sure that your members are achieving more than just good enough, that requires some leadership. It also requires a bit of a leadership from your clients, doesn't it, to actually be able to do that, and you're not being outpriced or outbid by competitors who don't have that culture or exhibit that leadership. And how do we overcome that sort of that culture, which I think is really embedded in our industry?
Well, it's interesting you should say that. We did some research on the Building Safety Act recently to establish. We've done a significant campaign on the Building Safety Act, and we have a department simply dealing with the Building Safety Act.
Yep.
And the research came back, and we discovered that BESA members know more than the average group in our sector.
Oh, well done.
And we went out to people outside of membership, which is good.
Yep.
What the feedback came back very strongly that very, very few clients understand their liabilities and responsibilities under the Building Safety Act.
Exactly the same as our research.
And so we are going to do a campaign in the summer around informing clients about their responsibilities, because I think again they're not intentionally making bad decisions, but they actually are not aware of their exposure to this. And that's why we talked a bit about, if you specify a BESA member, you have fulfilled your duty of care in a way that if you pick on price, you probably haven't.
You won't do. No. But I mean, so tackling those clients though is quite a challenge, isn't it? I mean, you're particularly, as most of your members are going to be one step removed from the ultimate client who is going to make the decisions about those prices and specifications.
Yes, it is difficult, but they drive the behaviours down the supply chain, don't they? So that's
They ought to.
You have to start with them. In fact, there's an argument you should say you start with the funders of the clients and say, actually, you need to just include a couple of clauses within your contract that would sort out how things happen down the supply chain.
Well, I've been promoting project bank accounts for nearly as well, certainly since the since government tried to promote them probably 10, 15 years ago was when the last paper came out from government on them. We're singularly failed to get those into client basis or even into the main contractor basis at the moment. It's a real challenge, and yet I believe it would solve an enormous number of problems that the industry encounters. I don't know whether it's something that you're promoting or not, but it's that sort of cultural change is what we need.
Yeah, very much so. They came from this sector, the requirement for
PBAs.
Project bank accounts.
Yeah.
I think we're making some progress on payment reform. There's a consultation due out, I think, in the next few weeks around payment, and retentions in particular. And I think we are making some progress on that.
Good. Well, I hope you're right, and certainly the retention reform was well past its due date as well. I mean, that would be great to be able to get retentions on a more statutory basis, that we're not just losing our profit margin off to somebody else and we never see it. I mean, it's a key element.
Yeah.
Different question for you, Dave. Do you see your members being more profitable in the sector because of the standards they're maintaining? Do you think there's a correlation between competence and return and
there should be
profitability? I know there should be.
Should be. Yeah, when I talked about our purpose, the third bit was it was competent, compliant, and profitable. If companies aren't profitable, how do they invest back in? I mean, one of the arguments against retention is that someone else is using your working capital that you could be using, and it's not just the fact they've got your capital; it's the hours you waste chasing it, which is the other bad thing. I think with the amount of work that there is on a major scale, things like Hinckley and then hopefully Sizewell B, HS2, major hospital buildings programs, there is so much work around that people involved in those projects are concerned about capacity. So not obviously, have we got the capacity in the UK to do all this work? And under those circumstances, you would expect that actually margins would rise because there are only so many companies who can evidence their competence to do these projects who would win this work. So I think we're at a tipping point where there's an understanding of the value of engineering services and the value to the client, and the Building Safety Act kind of closing that off. That means that we should see an increase in margins, but I think members would say at the moment it's very tight, very difficult. Yeah.
I mean, one of the challenges we have in that scenario you've just painted there, David, is as turnover increases for people, that's actually when we get more insolvencies in the industry, because such large low margin work. And I know BESA members will measure their margins slightly differently to the main contractors who might be listening to this. But in a low margin industry, increases in turnover have to be treated very carefully before you run out of cash to service them. And,
very much so, and particularly mechanical side, because the equipment component is so much higher than other sectors.
So why aren't one of my other hats I wear is the solar sector, and the solar sector is actually quite good at being paid for that material element early on in the contract rather than once it's been fixed and installed. Why haven't we been able to make that change in the construction sector? Why has that change not been made?
Well, I think construction contracts are not good, and the relationship is often a very large company employing a small company.
And
at that point, there is a differential in their ability to, shall we say, flex their muscles. And you can be in the right, but you need to have deeper pockets. And that's where the difficulty arises. And then there's always the next contract to win, So it is difficult. It is difficult without a doubt. Most of our members will work on repeat business, and it's a fine balance between aggressively chasing stuff and winning the next contract.
Yeah, I mean, given your position on providing the assurance for the industry to use BESA members, which is, as we know, is unique in the building services sector, isn't there an opportunity for your members to sort of club together to say these are the sort of the standard terms and conditions we might expect? I mean, we saw it in the lift manufacturers probably 20 years ago, where they refused to accept any retentions, and the industry had to say, if we want a lift, we're going to have to accept a retention bond rather than retentions. Now, I know we've
Yeah.
had the OFT inquiry since then, or at least 25 years ago, but is there an opportunity for that sort of collective work together?
Well, we have to be very mindful of the Competition Act.
Of course, yes.
Secondly, lifts, I think, are a great example of how it can be done, but there are not many players in
No.
the industry, and also it's a discrete install to some degree,
Yeah.
and it requires you to build the lift shaft, for example. And if the lift shaft isn't perfect or to the specification, they've gone and here's our build. Tell us when you're ready. It's much more difficult when you are involved in bits all around the building.
Yeah.
It becomes very, very much more difficult to exert that kind of control. And there's people are always calling for why don't we all refuse to do it? Well, there's always somebody who looks like the thing, is just good enough, and
Yeah.
that'll do, and we'll make it work. That kind of attitude to it, which the Building Safety Act really should knock out. I think in that sense, we look at the industry in thirds. There's 1/3 of the industry that immediately gets stuff. There's a law change, a legal change, a requirement. We need to get ahead of this, get it implemented, sorted. There's 1/3 who goes, I don't know why I'm being asked this. I really don't know what it's about, but I've got to do it, so I'll do it. And there's 1/3 who go, I've no idea what you're talking about. I've no interest in doing that. I'm going to do it how I do it. And it's that 1/3 that we need to remove from the industry, because they're the people who keep the whole standard down, because they win work, mess it up, and then
I think that's where the leadership's required, isn't it? Because we simply can't afford to lose 1/3 of the industry, given the work we've got potentially coming. But we have to get the message over. We have to try and be the agents for that change.
Well, and I guess the part of BESA is like a business improvement. The audit is a business improvement service, because it doesn't matter how good you are or what size you are, you will always learn something from the audit process, because it's the stuff you don't know, and there is so much change, constant change in regulations and the law, that you need a big team of people to be across that all the time. So this is your chance to get a good check. Am I up to speed on this?
Yeah. Very, really important. Let me just change the subject a little bit, David, and move onto skills. One of my hats I wear is a governor of a construction college, and we're busy training electricians and mechanical engineers and the like. We're finding it really difficult to find the companies to work with within the sector, and I'm hearing this problem across the country, that trying to find companies to work with young people coming through it's probably got more difficult since COVID. And I just wondered if BESA are making some inroads into trying to solve this problem, because without fresh blood coming into the industry, we're not going to be around for much longer.
We are. We're heavily involved in it. So we invested $500,000 in a new skills advisory service, because we did a survey of our members about 2 years ago, and over 66% said skills was their top priority, their top concern. So we have the team in place who go down and do skills audits for our members. Where's the skills gaps? What's your future skills requirement going to be? So having established that, can you get funding for it? Where are there places to do it? How can we help you to get through the process? One of their initiatives is a thing called SEED, I can't remember what it stands for, but it's how do you get into schools?
Yeah.
What do you need to do to be able to talk to, kids in primary school and secondary school about joining our industry? We've got a program for bringing in auditors at the back. So people who are sort of on the rundown to retirement, rather than retire, why don't you take a part-time job up, either lecturing in colleges or as an auditor? Because one thing the Building Safety Act has developed is the requirement to audit far more than we used to. But we can't get people to do the audits, and it's everything from endpoint assessments in apprenticeships through. But if you and you probably think I don't have the skill set to do that, so we kind of based it on the driving instructor course. You do a course, you do an exam, you've got your ticket. And it's that you've almost certainly, if you're in the industry, got the skill set to do this. You just need to be able to do the bits that give you the qual to be able to do that other bit. And then you could spend 5-10 years doing two days a week or whatever you want to do, rather than disappear and drive a taxi or whatever you fancy doing. So yes, we're acutely aware of that. But every industry thing I go to, and whether that's with the CBI or Build UK or wherever, but across all industries, we're short of people. And it's not a small amount, it's thousands.
Yeah, I know.
So you have to you have to look at things differently. You just have to look at things differently. And
I mean, one of those examples, David, is that we only take on half the number of apprentices that actually start. We're losing nearly 45% of apprentices who start don't make it into the industry. I mean, that's a colossal cost and failure in the system somewhere.
There's a lot of plumbers come through, but they finish the course, but they never come in the industry because they've got. It wasn't a proper course, if you get me. It wasn't the thing that the industry needed. And that, I think part of it is that problem, in that there's a disconnect between education and the colleges and then what employers want. But it's interesting. I was in the States at our equivalent organization conference, the MCAA, and they have a unionized workforce. And it is, and the union are responsible for training of apprentices. Now and they own the workforce, in effect, the craft side of the workforce. Now that actually sounds really, wow, how does that work? The only thing it does really, really help is that instead of looking for one apprentice here, one apprentice over there, and then two here, two there, bits and bobs, they want 200,000. Doesn't matter whether you're in Idaho or Washington or Florida, 200,000, same requirement, and we're recruiting nationally for this industry. And you've got some heft and scope. It's no wonder. I mean, particularly mechanical side, the capital investment for a college, say for ventilation, is huge.
It's enormous.
And how many people are you going to get through each year? A handful. So it makes it very difficult.
It does, but that's really where you need some regional centres to pick up these.
I think so, but then you've got
scale, isn't it?
You've got care and welfare. The 16, 17, 18-year-olds. You can't just send them off to go and live in lodging. You've got to, a university. They go in halls. They do it. And I think that's probably the model we have to get to. But that's a lot of money to do that.
No,
and the numbers are low. But it's like ventilation, for example, is a national requirement. You can't do an HS2 tunnel without ventilation.
No.
Where are the people coming from?
I'll have to introduce you to my college, David, because we do the accommodation very well. FE college with accommodation, few and far between. But I get the point. I mean, I think that we have to try and find a way of narrowing that gap that's appearing between education and employment somehow. And it's interesting. I mean, I don't know, on your appraisals of your companies, do you sort of set the 5% benchmark that ought to be trainees, or 10% that ought to be trainees, or are you sort of more pick and mix as to what's required?
We don't mandate that.
You don't mandate it.
We don't mandate that. No.
Oh well.
Perhaps we should.
Well, I
But
used to run a construction
yeah,
company. We said 10% had to be trainees or apprentices because we employed people for 40 years, and the average training program was 4 years.
yeah,
If you're going to run a stable business, 10% will have to be trainees and
very,
apprentices, and
very
that's
sensible.
very
It,
straightforward.
most good companies do, don't they? But
Yeah,
there's also one of the traits is the massive fall off in direct employment,
yeah, yeah.
and
No,
that how that is is a problem, and it's not just a problem for our industry, but for many of the people who don't make adequate pension provisions or insurance provisions if they're taken ill. We on some we have a benefits company called Wellplan. There are 70-year-old pipe fitters still out there because they don't have a pension.
yeah, yeah. No, no. I mean, on that self-employed versus employed, David, do you have a view about the ability of the self-employed to train themselves
No,
and be
I don't think they
competent?
do.
So how are they going to be competent under the Act then? I mean, we're
I think
driving.
if you look on, well, that's there will be a point, won't there, when this becomes a critical thing. Um, at the moment, you can't you can't expect self-employed people to train themselves because they see training as something they have to do. So they do the health and safety stuff, the bare minimum. If they're a gas engineer, they do the bare minimum of what they need to do. Many SMEs and micro businesses would really benefit from just business improvement stuff.
I know
Better
that
financial
absolutely.
knowledge,
Yeah, yeah,
better technical knowledge, or better project management knowledge. All of those things require investment in themselves, but it's really difficult when you're running a small business to you've got to win work, keep your workforce in place,
yeah, yeah,
keep them busy, and get paid, rinse, start again,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
if you go down particularly things like training, it requires different thinking. You got you and the
And the
one
longer
thing I
term
do know
thinking. I
about
mean,
training,
that's
it is so complicated that it requires different thinking. And you kind of go, do you know what? I'm going to go and see my kids. I'll do it tomorrow.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, yeah. I mean, the training you talk about there on sort of how to run your business is always one of my frustrations. Is that even on larger companies, we've got rid of the grandfather rights for everything in the industry. You're not allowed to even lay a brick without an NVQ level 2 these
No.
days. But you can run a business without any qualifications for running a business whatsoever. Those grandfather rights are alive and well in most
Yes,
of our boardrooms up and down the country. And
yes,
actually they're the people that exactly that you've just described set the culture, the tone, and actually the longevity of most of our businesses.
yeah,
And yet we're quite happy to have grandfather rights excluded everywhere apart from the boardroom, which has the most impact.
yeah.
So hey ho, I don't know how, that's a different problem. That's probably a different podcast or a different problem for
Yeah.
another day. I mean, just sort of drawing to sort of conclusion then, David. I mean, the trade federations um, are facing quite a lot of change in the sector. We've got the competency coming up. We've got green credentials arising. We've got a significant increase in technology on how membership bodies might be operated, might be run. Do you see more of these trade bodies jumping on the professional bandwagon that BESA are already at to be able to say this is, if you want to employ I don't know, a roofer or a main contractor or whoever, that vetting is going to have to be done by somebody, and the trade bodies are the best placed people to do that? Or do you think that's going to be done by external
I
arrangements, external
think
bodies?
I think it will inevitably be that way, that somebody has to be able to evidence competence and
Yeah,
compliance.
yeah,
And who better to do it than the trade body? I think we have to be a bit careful about trade bodies, actually, because there are a lot
yeah,
of trade associations that are not trade associations but are privately owned.
yeah,
And so we're wholly owned by our membership, and therefore, and we're not for profit. So everything
yeah,
we make, we put back into things like the development of apprenticeship standards.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's
There's no
exactly the same
money
as
in
us.
apprenticeship standards,
No,
none at all. But
but they're
why?
essential for
But
members,
we have
aren't
to
they?
do that. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
we have
Somebody
to
to
do
do it.
that, or nobody
Yeah,
would do it.
yeah,
Um, So I think it makes sense, and particularly is because we can galvanize the industry. I mean, who else but the industry knows what the industry needs? That you see what I mean?
Yeah, I don't disagree, but you've already talked. If we don't do it, somebody else is going to do it unto us, aren't we? And
Oh, indeed.
that's the dangerous bit.
I'll give you one example of how that kind of works. So, on district heating systems within the apartment blocks that you see built now, you have a heat interface unit in each place. A relatively new technology. There's nothing spectacular about it, but it's a relatively new thing.
Yeah.
And it's because there was a massive growth in towers and district systems. Then a lot of new entrants came into the there were OEMs and then people rebadging, and you could claim any coefficient of performance you liked on those things because you didn't have to prove it.
Yeah.
And that meant that a lot of systems were not working properly, and it was to the cost to the client in the end. So we developed a test certification scheme for heat interface units. There are test houses that manufacturers give their units to, and they're tested, and so we measure the coefficient of performance. Does it perform as the test standard? And that's available to clients then to select an HRU that meets that requirement.
Right.
Now that is set up because the industry needed it. There was a gap, so we've developed it so that it is better for clients and customers, and actually, everybody in effect. That you've got a better chance of having a coefficient of performance and energy efficiency in effect that can be proved.
Yep. Okay.
Simple. And that meant bringing manufacturers, consultants, contractors all together to go, well, what is the standard?
Yeah. And really crucial, because I can tell you with a solar hat on, because I'm heavily involved in the solar sector, we're beginning to realize that without that collaboration between manufacturers, installers, and actually financiers at the other end, the value engineering that happens in the silos starts to impact the overall effectiveness of that particular installation.
Yeah.
And that's a real challenge.
I think you're right. And I think manufacturers are beginning to understand that clients don't buy their product shrink wrapped on a pallet. No. They're designed, installed, and operational. And when it goes wrong, they don't say, "Oh, that's my fault." F&C cooling in wherever Scarborough's rubbish. Yeah. It's whatever the brand is that's on that thing, that's rubbish.
Yeah.
And it's no good then coming in and say, "Well, it's all been installed correctly." They need to have more ownership of, well, how is this being designed and installed?
Yeah. And we've had a classic example where we asked the design, what's the design factor of safety here? Oh, it's about 1.1, 1.2, whatever. And then you say, well, what's the install factor of safety? Well, what do you mean? Well, we're installing it by humans. It's going to be some errors in it. Well, we haven't thought about that. It's a crucial question to assess, and we're okay, but it just shows that working in silos isn't going to work at all. No. David, I mean, we've had a good run through all sorts of areas that your BESA are involved in, and how it's improving. You're trying to drive that change that you talk about within the sector and within the wider industry. And you talk about collaboration with across the sector. If I sort of ask you a last question, which is what would be the top areas that you'd like that change to happen in, or that collaboration to happen in across the sector, what changes would you like to be seeing?
I think it's the culture change, behavioral change that we need to see. That's the requirement, I think, and I don't think that will really happen until the building safety regulator makes a few prosecutions that someone sat in our seat, running a company's seat, and can picture themselves in that scenario and go, this is, we need to change. The Building Safety Act is meant to be covering everything from the shard to a shed. And that's the building safety regulator's term, not mine. And I don't think people understand that. And until, you're sat behind your desk and you go, that could be me. And by prosecution. I mean, was it Dame Judith Hackett said, have their collars felt, but an eye-watering penalty.
Yeah.
They go, ow. Because that's what happened in the financial services industry. Eye-watering fines.
Yeah.
Changed behaviours. And that's what needs to happen.
Yeah. Well, if there's any support for that, one of your predecessors on this podcast was a barrister called Ian Bridge, who prosecutes for the HSE and now defends against the HSE.
Oh, right.
And his abiding comment was, "You don't want to see me. You don't want to know me."
No, I can imagine.
If you get to my level, you're in trouble.
Yeah. And as a contractor, I always remember those things always came in Friday 4 o'clock.
Of course. Of course. Yeah.
I got one of those from a client on Christmas Eve. And it said he was basically going to sue everybody, every member of my family, and it ended with best warm wishes. Have a happy Christmas.
Bastard. Yeah, I think they've almost been outlawed, haven't they? They're seen for what they are now. Those before Easter adjudications are just you're 7 days to respond and you've lost most of it. I can see that. Most adjudicators see that through. David, it's been really, really great conversation, and wish you every success with BESA. And it's great to hear that main contractors from places like the National Federation of Builders have got places to go where they can be confident that their statutory duty to employ competent organisations to comply with building regulations under the Building Safety Act is being covered, and their best interests are at heart. And let's hope that we can change the culture in the industry, because I think we've got some way to go yet.
Yeah, and I would say, if anyone from the NFB, wants any advice, or have a look at our website first off, but give us a shout, and if we can answer it, we will. That's basically what we're here for.
That's very kind of you. Great offer. Thank you very much.
Okay.